Hello and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. And thank you for joining us for another panel as we look at the gender data gap and the startup ecosystem. I'm going to read a little bit. I'm actually presenting from Collingwood, and I'd like to pay tribute to the lands that I'm actually on. Collingwood resides within the territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes Chippewa, of the Nawash unceded First Nation and Saugeen First Nation, and is home to many Indigenous people, including Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. So thank you, everybody. Again, we are here with some amazing guests, and we'll be taking a look at the mental health technology side of the startup ecosystem. And today we have Dr. Louise Metcalf, who is the creator of George, and also Sakina Maihar with Savin. Welcome, ladies. Please, if you can turn on your camera. Wonderful.
Hi.
Hi. And Sakina, I will ask you just to give us a little introduction.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sakina Mihar. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Saving Tech, based in Toronto on Indigenous lands. Saving Tech is an inclusive mental health platform to heal trauma, providing access and removing barriers that vulnerable people face, whether it's language barriers, cultural barriers, financial barriers. We are digitizing really innovative therapies to provide that access.
Thank you, Sakina. And Dr. Louise Metcalf, I'd love to hear a little introduction from you as well. Oh, you're on mute.
The saying of the last 2 years, isn't it? I'm Dr. Louise Metcalf. I'm the founder and CEO of George, the little robot who helps kids 7 to 12 years old with anxiety and to build resilience. We're trying to work out how to digitize first responder therapies for kids, because we know that 2/3 of kids with anxiety are never diagnosed. So we're trying to get them help. I'm on the lands of the Guringai people in Australia, in the northern part of Sydney. I hope I said that right.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to really start off by, because in the spirit of the startup ecosystem, to tell us what the real genuine reason is that you started on your entrepreneurial journey. And Sakina, if I could start with you, that would be great.
Absolutely. So my journey is very personal as to why I became a founder of a mental health platform. I have lived experience with trauma. I am a survivor of war, and I'm a woman of color. I'm visibly Muslim. I've experienced a lot of racial trauma as well. And I was experiencing panic attacks, and when I'm also an immigrant, so a lot of things. So I'm carrying a lot of baggages. And when I was in Toronto and I moved and I heard sirens, like I experienced this heart pounding, brain freezing sensation, and I didn't know what was happening to me. It was until probably 6 years later, when I was able to afford and access care, I was formally diagnosed with PTSD and trauma. And I knew the language and the terms and how the tools to get better. I'm still getting better. You never get over trauma. Trauma is always with you. And I also noticed a lot of people in my community and all the communities were finding it really difficult to access mental health care. There are so many limitations. Our government doesn't fund mental health unless you're in crisis or certain specific situations. Mental health care can get quite expensive. And I was wondering, how can I, give this access and provide this access? This was my passion. It was on my mind. I was thinking about it a lot. My background is in tech. So I was like, how do I make this happen? And then I just decided to go for it in 2018. I went to a hackathon. I met my co-founders there. I pitched. We went on to win the Social Enterprise Impact Prize. And that's how I started. Like, this is really, really personal for me. And then there are a lot of people with trauma, and like very specifically looking into trauma is a very difficult place, and for people to talk as well. So I really hope, we are able to make somewhat of a change in this area.
You don't have to hope, because you already have made a very big difference in a lot of people's lives.
Thank you.
Dr. Louise, can you please tell us a little bit about your journey? What was the real reason that started your entrepreneurial journey?
Yes, I'm a senior psychologist here in Australia, and I've been practicing for almost 30 years. And I've done lots of different things, including like working with the United Nations and obviously all the on the couch work as well. And I practice in the city these days, in the centre of Sydney, surrounded by lots of private schools. And I'd noticed that childhood anxiety seemed to be rising, but because these private schools particularly are known for, putting a lot of pressure on kids, I just thought it was them. When I had my own kid, I took him along to daycare, and it was really shocking to me that every conversation I had after I said I was a psychologist was about childhood anxiety. So it really made me look at the numbers, and they'd gone through the roof since I started practicing, which I had not realized that had happened. And it was sort of a quirk of fate that a friend of mine was asking me to do some modelling for the Medicare review here in Australia at the time. And I put the two side by side on my desk. It really hit me between the eyes that we're not going to meet this. We have no chance, absolutely no chance of meeting the tsunami of need that is coming our way and that is already here. So even before the pandemic, the rates were terrible. They were 1 in 5. Shocking, considering when I started practicing, that was less than 1%. So horrible. And then in the pandemic, UNICEF, did a study and determined that it was 1 in 2, either severe stress or diagnosable anxiety. So that's terrible, because there are very serious long-term health effects as well as immediate effects for education and for relationships for kids. And it's also a terrible illness that is entirely preventable if we get there early enough. So it really hit me. And at the time, I was really enjoying my my little robot vacuum, which I highly recommend. They're awesome. And I was, doing the vegetables and talking to him every now and then. And it just occurred to me, every kid needs a little robot. So the first thing I did, of course, was, actually prototype a little robot. And then rapidly discovered that nobody was going to give us psychologist money to build a robot. So we moved on to making an app. And I really owe my progress in the app to an accelerator in Australia called She Starts, which was only for female founders, and was the one to notice and decide, yes, we want to help build George. So there's my journey.
And I think that that's really important place to kind of jump to the next question, because mental health tech is all about supporting other people. Who would you consider as your biggest supporter? And I know, Dr. Louise, that you actually talked about She Starts. Is there somebody in particular that was your biggest supporter?
Look, every parent that I come across is a major supporter of George. Even parents that don't have kids with, a mental illness, know the rise. They've seen more and more parents are noticing the rise around them. So they're more and more concerned that it's going to be their kids. So every parent. But also the way She Starts happened was kind of weird. Don't judge me, I was doing my psychology notes, my clinic notes, and Facebooking at the same time. And then a Facebook, ad came up on my feed, which was, do you have a crazy idea that would change the world? So yes, so I submitted that, and that's where it all started. And She Starts was powered by Blue Chili here in Australia, and they were just awesome. They were just absolutely awesome. There was, lots of moments of, to be frank, sexism. There's lots of sexism in the tech world here. But Blue Chili would always question that. They would always say, is this for real? Is there something you can get out of it, but don't take it personally and don't listen to them substantially. So they were just so great at managing that. I think because they'd seen it so many times. And there were some awesome people in the team, like Philippa, who's this incredible organizer for She Starts, and also there's someone called Luther who's brilliant at that as well. So they're just great champions, and they're very knowledgeable about the very dominant sexism that is in this area.
It's a building a community and a network, I guess. And,
absolutely.
And Sakina, who would be your biggest supporter?
I have to start with family first. My family has been the biggest supporters of my idea to, like Dr. Louise, change the world, right? I saw a problem and I wanted to change it, and taking on big ideas and executing them feels really overwhelming. When I started, I was working in tech, I was a UX person, and I was also an equity and inclusion consultant. So for me to kind of flip and become a founder was like, where do I start? Like, what is my business model? How do I make money? How do I monetize this? Like, how do I develop a product? How do I build a team? What are the legalities? Like all of that, I'm still learning. So I cannot be where I am without all the mentors and advisors. So I'm also part of the incubator here in Toronto at Ryerson University Social Ventures Zone, who have really helped me push that social side of it. How do we make impact, and how do we grow? And then I have to acknowledge Mirella. She was the organizer of the first hackathon that I went to with my idea. She was there from like day one supporting me. And like Dr. Louise said, there's so much sexism. It just like hits you in the face in the startup world. I would go for these speeches and it would be a panel of white males. And I'm like, ooh, how do I connect? But they were fantastic. They were lovely. Nothing against them. It's just that I didn't see anyone who looked like me or know where I'm coming from in the beginning. I think it's changing a little bit. And going back to like, who are my biggest supporters? Like definitely, Cindy and Teresa, I have to call out to you to be my like kind of rock and partners. And then really these advisors, the other advisors from my incubators, I'm learning. And being an entrepreneur is really, really hard. And coming into this entrepreneurship journey, having to bootstrap everything, getting those funding. And this is the one pet peeve of mine. I am sure it is for a lot of female founders, right? You say, oh, females are not getting enough funding. They're not getting this. We're going to promote female founders. And then you apply for a grant or you apply for a thing. And there's like this one barrier, right? How much money, how much revenue have you made? I'm like, hello, give me the money. I can't make this happen, right? And I was reading that article about the questions that VCs and investors ask about males, females, the type of questions they ask males versus females, right? I feel a little bit of like that. Like there are quite a number of hurdles to, I'm glad the problem is getting recognized, but I think we need to move a step beyond the recognition and actually start those implementations and those rollouts.
And I think, so we actually had a panel. So there's two things that I wanted to kind of go a little bit more into depth on. Just what Sakina is referring to is the gender bias in questions asked by both male and female investors to female founders. And the questions are very preventative in how they're asked to females, rather than male founders are asked promotional questions. And I'll give you an example because it's great to say that the bias is there, but let's give you the tools on how to fix that. So if you're, as an example, you're getting a preventative question, this is a very saturated market, the mental health tech, there's so much going on because of COVID. How do you plan to beat all these other people that are doing the same thing? You'll be turning around and saying, are you asking what my go-to-market strategy is? So you've just quashed that, and all they can do is say, yes, that's what I'm looking for. So that's one thing. And another revelation that we had in the last panel, which was Founders Panel, is that FFA for women, that friends, family, and close associate round, is much more difficult. So we are going to call that a pre-seed round and see if we can raise that within our ecosystem, but something to think about there. The next question then is, and it really kind of flows really nicely from this, when was the first time you considered gender bias in the business decisions you made? Dr. Lees, we'll go with you first.
Oh gosh, that's hard actually. I think I've always known it was there. I don't think it was a shock. The biggest shock I got in the startup world was and so I've been a serial mental health founder. So I've actually created multiple mental health businesses. Largely they're very traditional though, like clinics and consulting models. It's my first tech one, and talking to some of the investors here in Australia could be quite shocking. But I think that was the first time I ever heard anybody very specifically say that they preferred a man running the business. So before that, I'd had multiple conversations where people were very subtle about it, like, do you have family plans? Kind of thing, right? But this is the first time someone had specifically said, basically you're uninvestable as a woman running the business. You're fine to be there, right? You're fine to be a technical person or something, but you should have a man running the business. So that was really confronting. And I think from then on, I kind of, had my radar up and have seen it, more obviously since then. So, I can pick up the signals basically that they're after something else. I'm quite feminine as well. I'm very aware that my voice is quite feminine. My body shape is very feminine. I did try short hair for a while. That didn't do anything. Don't bother, ladies. So it's, I know femininity is interpreted as being soft. So I think probably that's how they see it. But obviously, if you've run a business before, you're really not that soft. So I find that a really interesting kind of juxtaposition, my history versus my presentation, and how people, sort of go for the presentation over the history quite regularly.
That makes sense. And it's true. I mean, one of the things is I read it in a book very recently oh my gosh, the uterus is a feature, not a bug, by Sarah Lacey, which is an amazing book. And one of the things that she says is own yourself, own your femininity. That's who you are. Don't try to be one of the guys. Don't try to go into the boys club and go, head to head, because you're going to have an easier time navigating things as yourself. Sakina, when was the first time that you considered gender bias in your business dealings?
I would say it was very early on, like, even when I was pitching for the idea in the beginning, and I would see a lot of males judging and males in the panels and males. And I do realize that, in Toronto, at least, there seems to be a discrepancy in tech as well. Females are represented in smaller numbers. So, going into that, like, I had that idea, but thankfully, I didn't have like such a shocking revelation as Dr. Louise, who's someone who questioned me. I think it's also because of what I look like, automatically I don't fit in ideas of who a founder should be, just because of, how I wear my hijab and my niqab. So I've had to really push to stand on my identity a lot. So I think having that kind of experience also helped me kind of push forward through the sexism I have encountered in the startup world, at least. And I was really thinking about, are you going to be taking some leave? In my first year of being a founder, I was pregnant. And I was thinking to myself, oh, okay, like, if I start now, will I get questions and I'm going to go on your parental? Like, do men get asked these questions? And like, I was all like prepping for all of that. One of the nice things I think I realize is because I am the CEO and I am the founder, I make the rules. And my rules are like, come as you are. We'll make space for you, right? Whoever in my team needs whatever type of help, we are here for you, right? And that's something because I understand as a female myself and other things that I carry with me as well, that like we need to make that space because it has, and that's why I think female leadership is so important. It's just the equity part, the gender equity part is just like in my DNA and in my company's DNA, because my team is mostly female from diverse backgrounds. It's not something I was keeping an eye out for and asking for, but it just happened that way. And I think like growing that organically because of who you are and like your experiences and your understanding of those smaller groups, or like not smaller groups, I take that back, not well represented groups, right? We do break down that barrier. So like I think having that representation and that being there as a female founder, being there as a female lens really makes a difference in some aspects.
And Sakina, I think I want to go down on that a little bit, that path a little bit more. And our ideas of gender bias are unique to our culture, our religion, our experiences. What lens, and I'll be asking this of both of you, what piece of that lens are we missing in our impression of what gender bias is from your perspective?
Yeah, so for me, I don't think we can talk about gender bias and gender gap without acknowledging the multiple identities someone comes in with. So I am female, but I'm also Muslim, and I'm also a person of color, and I'm an immigrant. So the best way I can describe this is I'm climbing a really difficult mountain. That first mountain is called person of color. So I climb it up. I meet some racism and some trauma surrounding that. I come down that mountain. I'm pretty tired, but I've got enough in me to keep going. So the next mountain I climb is called the Muslim mountain. Let me tell you, that is a really hard one because there's so much bias against being Muslim and so much implicit bias. It's so pervasive, right? It's in how news gets reported. It's in our popular culture. Something as small as Aladdin, right? Aladdin is a Disney cartoon. It started off as a Disney cartoon, but there is like the Arabian land is called barbaric, right? And like how that representation and how that narrative is spoken about makes such a big impact on how people perceive people who don't look like them. So for me, that mountain of being a Muslim, of me wearing my niqab, wearing my hijab, it's such a bigger, harder mountain for me to climb than being a female, because it's just so unavoidable for me. So these different identities. So these identities that people carry, right? Whether, do you have disabilities? As an able-bodied person myself, I don't face a lot of those baggages or those mountains I need to climb. If you're queer, right? Like what are the mountains you have climbed? So like, I climb down that mountain and then I have another big mountain called female. I'm like, wow, okay, which ones do I want to pick? So I kind of pick my battles. So it's really important to bring those intersection of identities into the conversation about gender, because I think the experiences of where you lie in that intersection makes such a big difference. And it's like for me personally, it's not only about the wage gap, for example. It's also if you're a new immigrant who comes into Canada and you're qualified, got the experience, but you start from scratch. So you see that, so a new immigrant male actually might be making so much less money than a female who's already there. So there are all these things you have to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, I very much understand, and I don't understand, sorry, but one of the things that I got from you, and I have to thank you, was a new understanding of what female empowerment is. Female empowerment is very unique to us. So my female empowerment to me means something that it might be to you. And one of the things that I cherish that you gave me was the understanding about the niqab and the hijab with that video that you shared too. And it is a form of empowerment to you, right? And I think that it's very important for us to realize that how we choose to express our personal empowerment is not anybody else's. They shouldn't try to take from it. So thank you for that. Dr. Louise, what piece of the lens are we missing from your perspective?
Look, I want to talk about numbers.
Numbers are good.
Of course, right? So the numbers are really telling, and I think we need to look at them really clearly. Like, I can't comment, unfortunately, on things like being Muslim, because I just don't know enough. But I can talk about being female, and in investment, women get an incredibly small amount of the funding. So what I want to see is people looking at the numbers. Like, if you look at all the startups you've invested in, this is what I would like every VC fund and angel investors, anybody who invests in startups, to do. If you look at that list and you go, right, how many of these, when you originally invested, how many of them are solo male founders? How many of them are only male founding teams? How many of them are male and female founding teams? And then how many are solo female founders? How many are only female founding teams, right? If you look at those numbers, it's going to be very telling. I don't think you would find a fund in the world that would have these numbers equal. And the truth is, right, the talent is not distributed across, to one gender, right? So if that's your numbers, where you deliberately, skewed in one direction, yes, it's going to be male. Think about that, right? You've got a bias. That's a fair dinkum, Australian saying bias. You've definitely got it, right? Yeah.
Indeed.
You've got to sit with that and go, right, okay, we've just made it conscious. We've just seen here that we are biased against women. And then go, right, we're obviously uncomfortable when it comes to investing with women. We need to stop that. We need to start applying the same criteria as we applied to men to women. Or literally take the gender out of it, right?
Yes.
Would you invest in this organization? Sorry, I was talking about employment yesterday. So would you invest in this organization if this person was male, or if this founding team was all male, or if there were more men maybe in the founding team? Do the numbers and actually look at how biased you really are, because you are leaving money on the table. That's what that equates to.
And I think that's really powerful. And I'm going to bring this image that a lot of people have seen. My daughter brought it to me a couple of years ago. And she said, I finally understand the difference between equity and equality. And there were these 3 blocks of equal size and a wall, and on the other side was a game. The first man stood on the box and he was able to see over perfectly. The woman stood on the box, but even though it was equal size, she wasn't able to see over. And the person in the wheelchair wasn't even able to get up on the box. So it's not about equality. It's not about us competing to be the same. It's about celebrating who we are and finding our equitable solution that invites us into or puts us on the same platform. The gender bias, and I have to bring up this book because honestly, it was a key thing that drove me to putting the summit together. The Invisible Women Data Bias in the World Designed for Men by Carolyn Criado Perez, and a number of aha moments throughout that book that really kind of set the playground for us making change at the level of startups when they're first being formed, because that's when they're malleable. So that's when they can say, yes, my product or service is gender influenced. I have thought about how women or people with different abilities will be using my product and or service. And that's how we make change and affect the large level of change, because corporations need to monetize it quickly. Governments work too slowly, and banding together as women, we've seen how that ends. So this is a way to subtly do it. And I guess on that note, I'd like to kind of figure out, what do you think the next big step should be that we take to be able to influence or be able to put lower gender bias or influence, bring in the female influence into design? And I'll ask Sakina first.
Okay, I unmuted myself. I think we need to make a lot of small steps too, and those big steps. And having women in leadership positions, oh boy, that makes such a big difference. Like having that lived experience, the person there to even consider, because questions don't get asked around the female experience, right? So having a female there that kind of leads it, and being able to design policy and systemic changes, I think has to come from there, is like one potential solution. And I see that with the way we run our organization. So for example, I didn't think about gender and equity, and it's really interesting how all of us have implicit bias, right? And what are like our implicit bias? So there is the Harvard implicit bias test to figure out like what are your implicit biases. But like one of the things that we are doing at Savin, for example, we are running a clinical study at the moment at the University of Toronto and Sick Kids Research Institute. And one thing that has been bothering me about COVID and the vaccination is a lot of my female friends said the vaccination impacted their period. And I went online and I tried to look at it, and there was an actual thing, because they didn't have enough female participants for the COVID vaccinations. This side effect was like overlooked, and it impacted me. So it was not something that like females made it up, right? Like that's kind of also the thing that say, oh, it's all in your head. It's not. Like you don't have the data because you're not recruiting the right people to tell you that this is actual. So for us, it was really important. So when we are running the clinical study, I told my research team and my research interns, but like, we need females in this study. So I don't know how it's going to happen, but make sure at least half is female. And we did that. Like our study participants' gender is leaning towards female. And I'm really glad that we are doing that, so that when we are studying the impacts of trauma and like using our platform, and the outcomes are not just based on a specific biological model, right? So it includes that too.
And that's important, that research is not biased, which it has been stereotypically in the past or historically in the past. So, Dr. Louise, how about from your lens?
Yeah, so there are two problems you want to keep in mind, right? Like in mental health, pretty much all the theories actually are built on samples of white male college students. So particularly for artificial intelligence or, really anything that we're doing now, we should be definitely working against that. We should definitely be trying to balance gender. You should, even if you're lucky enough to have larger sample sizes, which is a problem for a lot of university studies, but certainly can be done for, big pharmaceutical companies, for example. You should also be thinking about other things as well, like other demographics. So definitely trying to actually get proper representation into your sample, and starting off with gender. Yes, definitely. And I totally agree, Sakina, that we need more women making those decisions. I've had lots of discussions with people as well, where they say parenting tech is not a thing. That's not a thing, is it? But of course it is, and it's a major gap actually around the world, and a major area where organizations can make a difference as well. So it's a thing where, yes, okay, mostly it's mums who take the load of children, but more and more dads are doing it. So, it definitely is a thing. And I'm sure that, having more women in senior management would actually, you'd have those discussions a lot more, and organizations would be a lot more parent friendly, which I think is a major problem. But also you have this secondary problem of bias in women's heads. So it seems like such a great idea, right? Just equal the numbers across, and I'd love to see that actually, equal the numbers across senior management, middle management, everywhere, every job, every organization. That would be awesome. But we still have this secondary problem in that women still buy into the bias themselves. So when you look at implicit biases, as I'm sure you know, we have this fundamental notion of what it means to be a leader. What is leader like? And the truth is, any man who walks into a job interview is automatically assigned the title leader like. So they could, potential for, promotion or whatever. Whereas any woman that walks into that room is not automatically assigned that label. So if you're going to get it, you have to really prove it. And if there's a book called The Labyrinth, which kind of demonstrates that probably women are never assigned it. So we have a lot of difficulties actually tackling that implicit bias for both genders. So the two problems, yes, equal the representation, but secondarily tackle the bias, make it conscious and actually deal with it. Yeah.
I love that. Can I add something to that too? Is also the leadership qualities, right? Who defines them? Like a leadership, going on empathy is frowned upon, and it has to be authoritarian. That's the traditional model. And I really think with the new founders, hopefully, I'm seeing challenging those norms, because my style is not that at all. I'm very empathy based, and I do and it's true, unlearning all these things they've taught us about what a leader should look like. I had to unlearn that, because I felt like there was a discrepancy if I was being too soft. What does that mean? I'm considering the whole person. I need to make space for the whole person. And yes, I need to run the business, but I think we can model the business and running the business in more caring ways that doesn't put the business at risk, which should be newer models. And there are lots of ways of being and not one way of being. I love that.
Yeah. Newer models. Can I add to that agreement just a little bit and say, absolutely, Sakina, we don't have to lead anymore the way we used to, say in the 50s, right? Where communication, yes, could be a problem. Maybe you did have to yell over machines or something like that, right? These days we have data. It's mostly about problem solving. Tech is teamwork anyway. So, a much more collaborative style is actually a much more effective style in what we do. So, yeah, couldn't agree more.
And I think that's extremely powerful. The new models of leadership, there's so many new concepts that we're coming up with. I think just over the last couple of sessions today even. So how, and with all of these new ideas about how we should be moving forward, how do we measure that? So how, anytime we put something into action, as scientists yourselves, how do we create, how do we make sure that that the metrics are in place and that we've got those KPIs or those objectives or that rate of return? How do we attach these to key deliverables, I guess, and key metrics? Dr. Louise, we'll start with you.
I think you've got to do that from day one. So from the very start of every single process, basically. So if you're recruiting, you want to be collecting more resumes, do more work to equal the genders coming in to your process, basically. So work on it. There actually are some great systems out there that take gender out of the equation as well. So it would be good to trial those as well. But what you want to see is that you're actually seeing equal numbers of men and women for each role. Right. And the reason for that is because then you're not working on the bias, right? You have taken the bias out because the talent is equal regardless of gender. And then when it comes to actually, who you recruit, who you actually position into the job, look at that. That should be reviewed, at least 6 monthly. Do you have equal numbers of people equal numbers of gender, each gender in those roles? And then you just keep going, keep rolling. And in things like, something as small as, say, a single team meeting, there should be a really conscious effort to make sure that people are heard. So one of the big things that happens for women is that we tend to get, heard. The idea gets heard, but not assigned to us as an idea in a meeting. So the meeting will roll on, and then there'll be, a male in the room which has heard that idea, heard what is said by that woman, and will repeat the idea. They might reframe it a little bit, but it's the same idea. Mm-hmm. And then what tends to happen is the next person who then refers to that idea refers to the man, not to the woman. So what we want to do is try and be conscious about that. Try and give credit where credit is due, and just really pay attention, because that is a very subtle signal, but is very powerful, and it is important for leaders to pay attention and actually do that in meetings. So that's something that we encourage in George, actually, is always recognizing where the idea comes from and addressing that in a really open fashion. That's a great idea. Thank you very much. I can see how that builds on so-and-so's idea, right? It's pretty obvious. You get into a rhythm, it gets easier. As far as KPIs go, yes, numbers, always the numbers, right? We are so easily biased. Facebook is great with those algorithms, right? We're all seeing stuff we want to see. Yeah, right. The only way that you're going to be able to see it, really see it, is through numbers. So keep tracking everything. Track the numbers of resumes you get for each gender. Track the number of people in each role for each gender. Track the number of people in senior leadership. Track, if you're in investment, track the number of solo female founders versus solo male founders, right? And equalize, constantly working on that equalization. It's maybe a challenge in some areas where women are currently, struggling to kind of get a foothold in terms of the type of work, for instance, STEM. I know Google has struggled really to kind of equalize those numbers in Australia in terms of the resume input for some of their technical roles. But that's when we know we need to get out there and start getting more women into those study areas, right? So just keep working on it, and we will get there. Because if you've got unequal numbers, you have a gender bias. There is no other way to look at it.
And I think that's very powerful and very poignant. And I'd like even bring it back further to the bias in history, where we've been actually excluded from history and in books. So even starting further back to be able to make sure that everything that we're teaching our children is reflecting both genders. And to the points that you made, as well as to the history side of things, I'd also like to encourage everybody to read the book Mother of Invention: How Good ideas get ignored in an economy built for men by Catherine Marcel, M-A-R-C, arc-en-ciel, or not rainbow, circumflex A-L. And so, and Sakina, what about from your perspective in terms of metrics and KPIs? What should we be putting in place to ensure that these changes that we're in the process of affecting right now actually take hold and are accountable?
I agree with everything Dr. Louise said. I think it starts in the beginning. So when we started, we were really mindful of adding inclusion to everything we do. So we're being very mindful of that inclusion lens. So data is definitely, a yes, but how we define the data was important to us. So, looking at who's hired, male genders, and also going a little bit further than to say like what are the abilities and who is really at the table. Tracking data is a little bit easy and a little bit difficult. But I think going into practicing it with intention to say that, so for example, like when we are doing research, making a mindful decision, yes, we understand there's always historically been a data gap, but we will try to avoid that and do this, and going into it with that intention. And then it is hard, right, when you're working with external stakeholders who necessarily don't have the same priorities, and you get pushed and like, why is the study taking so long? Well, we are looking for participants. Why haven't you found participants? Well, this is our inclusion criteria, right? So you do get that pressure from external stakeholders, but then trying to go back to that goal or that North Star, which like defining that North Star and making it part of an organization's DNA to be intentional about inclusion, and then like using that for all the practices, including KPIs, culture, policies, all of that, which can be summarized with KPIs, but it really comes with that intention setting and the KPIs.
And I think that's really poignant, practicing with intention. I think that if we approach everything with that lens on, we'll be able to affect quite a bit of change. What support do we need to scale this actionable change, or this practicing with intention? What do we need? What support do we need? What tools do we need to put this into practice? I'm going to start with you, Sakina, this time.
That is a great question. I think the more we talk about it and bring awareness, like what you're doing, calling out the implicit bias, because a lot of people, it's just like, this is just the way things have been done, right? Like challenging the norms, questioning, unlearning is such a big, important part of the journey. Like, I feel like unlearning is such a huge part of the journey. Like you said, historically going backwards and seeing like how many females' ideas were like looked away, right? Or not credited to. And unlearning that bias is so important. So I think it's like a macro and a micro level changes that we need to do. So starting with that, like starting with self first, I suppose, getting intentional, like unlearning, learning, all of that. But also in a big, higher level, pushing for policy change, pushing, which is a lot of hard work, but aligning yourself with people who are doing the hard work is a great start, I feel. And I found like the biggest support coming from allyship, like being with like-minded people, because sometimes working for these changes can get overwhelming because the system is so large and in place for so long. You're like, nudge, 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 nothing happens. But then like to see that, that effect that you're having as a larger group kind of helps you also center yourself.
Yeah. And Dr. Louise, what support would you like to see for this actionable change?
Well, I'd like to see regulatory changes, actually. I think that would make people really sit up and listen. After such a long stretch, we have a great program in Australia called Male Champions of Change, which is about trying to equalise women's representation in organisations. And it has some really interesting results. These are powerful men. These are men around the country who are captains of industry, who are champions of change for equalising gender in organisations. And the data is fascinating because they made such a lot of progress for frontline roles and for supervisory roles. But where it stalled was in middle management and senior management. So they've literally stalled. It's been going for a while, and it's just hit this point now where it just isn't shifting anything. And I think that's really telling. It shows you the limits of organizations and very powerful people working on their own. And even as an industry group, right? I think there is a point here where you kind of have to go, right, if we want full productivity in our country, we have to do this. We have to actually just get it done, where women are considered equal right across the board. There are lots of great women's equality agencies around the world. We have one in Australia as well. But they too have struggled, right? Because they've hit this point where you just can't, where there's an inertia, you just simply cannot get change, largely down to this leader-like problem. So I think they just have to kind of regulate, get it done. And that could be for a short period of time. We don't necessarily do that forever. Maybe we just need a cultural shift and then it's done, But I think there's kind of a reality there that we kind of need to face. There's only so much that even these massive, powerful people can do. So we need something else.
We've looked at change happen on a massive level with COVID and how quickly things can turn around. And I'm wondering if I might be able to speak to somebody at that Male Champions of Change, because perhaps that's one of the keys to how we can actually affect change. So hopefully I'll run another panel next month and maybe have a few representatives from different countries that can champion that. But that'll be an actionable change from this, because I think that is a wonderful side. So on that point, the last question, what person or business is doing it right now? And I'll start with you, Dr. Louise.
Oh, I really need time on that one. Look, I think technology is more across it. I mentioned the problems that Google faces, so they've got all the resources to throw at it, right? And they're still struggling. I think organizations that are tech run by women, you are going to see more progress simply because, we are much more dynamic, to be honest. And basically you are looking for the talent. We're talent, talent hungry. So we're much less likely to accept those barriers. You just can't really. I mean, you're not going to make it. You have to kind of go, right, let's just go with it. Savine, you said, Sakina, you said that you would, take people as they come. And I think that's exactly the competitive advantage that we have actually as women, is we take people as they come. And so we work on advancing them. There's a type of organizational format in here called the developing organization. I think that's it. And that's where you actually sort of see your role as a leader as actually developing people to reach their expertise level, as far as they can go, basically. And that is definitely where we stand. I feel it is a competitive advantage. So I think, women, particularly women in tech, although I have seen it in not-for-profits, we're the ones driving that because it's a necessity. And we also kind of get it as women, you know, like we've all been in that situation where people go, you know, you might be talented, but you know, what's your family plans, right? And so we kind of know those limits, and we're like, well, you know, we can't afford those limits, so let's just keep going, let's keep growing people and just maximize that. So yeah, I can't think of a specific organization, to be honest, other than George, of course, and obviously
and that's okay to say your own, because honestly, you are making a difference, right? You are doing it right now. And Sakina, who do you know right now that is doing it right now?
This is, I agree, an incredibly hard question. And I agree with everything you said. It's really difficult to point out an organization because really also we don't know what's going on behind the scenes to an extent. And I agree, you know, female founders in tech are making those changes, like just looking at both our stories, right? And your stories as well. But I do really like, everyone knows Rihanna and her Fenty Beauty. I love her representation, like how she picks women of color, transgender, like, and I feel like at least on the PR front, she is doing it right, like queen. And then I also feel NYX, the brand NYX, like I really admire her, the work she's done with like body shape, body wear. I really admire like these two female, and they're not in tech necessarily, but I feel, and it's really difficult to say because I don't know what's going on behind the scenes and, you know, what the challenges are, but like outwardly, at least I feel like, oh yeah, I want to model that, like inclusion practices and how they hire and how they give back to their employees. Like NYX did a round, like they did a raise, and I read this, and they like the CEO, she paid all her employees like a fully paid vacation for a month. And I'm like, that's the type of leader I want to be. Like I get like we do a raise, all the raise does not go to the CEO, it goes to everyone who's working with us. So yeah.
And I think that's amazing, and we should start sharing. I think that's one of the biggest things that I learned from today's session was that leadership styles need to change, and we need to appreciate each other's lenses, because that's the only way we're going to learn to open ours up to new versions of what we're seeing. And I'm going to end, like, thank you for both Sakina and Dr. Louise for joining us today. I am realizing that I forgot to introduce Teresa, who is basically my right hand. She's an amazing support for me, and an amazing mentor and advisor as well. And I'd like to kind of leave with this story. When I was young, I lived around the corner from where I went to school. And I went running after my friend, yelling at the top of my lungs, Hilda, Hilda, Hilda. And I ran up and realized it wasn't her. So I kept running around the corner, Hilda, 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 until I was out of earshot and eye shot. And I use that as a lesson or analogy for everything I do. Just keep running and waving. So thank you again, ladies. This was absolutely wonderful and very informative. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.